The playoffs are in sight, and nailing those start-sit decisions has never been more important. We're going to break down each and every game on this week's slate, answering all of your questions along the way. Tom, we're going to start off with a fairly juicy matchup with a 49.5 over-under. It is the Green Bay Packers versus the on a win streak Jacksonville Jaguars. Can they make it 2 weeks on a trot?
I don't really think that they're probably going to. I mean, this one, it just feels like everybody's in start all your Packers mode. And I think for the most point that has to be right, because we are talking about a Jags defense that ranks 32nd in pass defense DVOA. They completely what teams want when they're, if you've got fantasy players in this matchup, you should feel pretty happy because Jags give up the most points to quarterbacks, the 7th most to running backs, the 4th most to wide receivers, and the 6th most to tight ends. So there's hardly a bad position to start against them. There is a couple of things that, like, when you dig into the stats, you go, that doesn't feel amazing, because the Jags lead the league in man coverage. They play at 44%. Easily the most that any team does. And Jordan Love ranks 29th in QBR versus man coverage. He ranks 33rd out of 33 quarterbacks in yards per attempt in those looks. He has only seen 36 snaps against man coverage, so it's definitely a small sample size. But as I was kind of digging into it this week, thinking this is one of those games that you could absolutely hammer in DFS, it just gave me a little bit of pause and maybe made me think, well, maybe it'd just be more looking for small correlations for DFS, but it wouldn't stop me starting anyone in fantasy. And on the Jag side, it kind of, look, ever since I came on here and I said that I wasn't going to stand for your Christian Kirk erasure, he's been awful. Brian Thomas has just ascended to the next level. He's 5th in receiving yards this season with 513, which is the most by a rookie since 2020. That's the most by a rookie in 2024. He's averaging 17.1 yards per reception. And he is the first player with 500 plus receiving yards on 30 or fewer receptions through 7 career games since a guy called Randy Moss in 1998. So very much in on Brian Thomas. But yeah, Trevor Lawrence, I don't really want to start him. Do you think there's any kind of cause for hope with Trevor Lawrence?
It's becoming beyond ridiculous at this point. I still believe in the talent. I still think he makes 3 or 4 throws a game that 4 or 5 guys in the league can make. The problem is that this offense is woeful. It's set in the early 2000s. I don't think the help is around him. I think Gabe Davis is useless. I don't think the scheme helps him. I don't think the offensive line helps him. I don't think the receivers are helping him. But he also misses some throws. So yeah, this week I kind of would start him in Superflex. I've still got him in a couple of Superflex leagues, but yeah, in 1QB, there's absolutely no way you're touching him. On the Packers side, you said great matchup for basically everyone. We got all 4 of the wide receivers supposedly healthy and playing. Is it a case of Dubs and Jaden Reed and you can't touch the other 2? How are you attacking it?
Well, it's Christian Watson for me who I don't want to start. Like, we saw Dontavian Wicks last week getting more targets, more first read targets, better target share. And Christian Watson is consistently the player who's most inconsistent. It's not like the spike weeks are massive. Now you're kind of just hoping that he gets a touchdown. He's not commanding enough volume to make up for being volatile. So yeah, I don't want any part of Christian Watson. I'd go as far as to say in most traditional redraft leagues, I think he's a drop. I think that you can look at the Jag side and go, Tank Bigsby, I'd be fine starting. I don't think that we're ever going to see Travis Etienne fully recover the role that he had. He's better pass catcher than Tank Bigsby, but Tank Bigsby looks like the better running back right now. So if you pushed, I think I'd be okay starting Tank Bigsby. It's just that the Packers, they're kind of middle of the pack, not to use a pun there, but like they rank 16th in run defense DVOA, 15th in fantasy points allowed to the running back position. So if you really need a lot of points out of him, this might not be the game for it, but I don't mind starting him.
Yeah, I'm nervous about Tank Bigsby, and to be honest, I talked about this in our Discord and in my preview review write-up that I did after last week's games. Now is the perfect time to be selling Tank Bigsby because he has got an absolutely horror run of matchups where I think the Jaguars are going to probably lose all of their next 5 games, and they're going to be trailing in all of them considerably. And sadly, he just can't get on the field in passing situations. We saw on Sunday, Dearness Johnson's getting all of the passing downs work. Tank Bigsby gets one target and he basically punched the ball backwards for 5 yards. So, yeah, I think for me, a flex option I'm fine with, but Bigsby isn't in my top 24 this week, and I think it's going to be hard to see him in that top 24 over the next probably 4 or 5 weeks. But Tom, start sit questions. If you've got any start sit questions, get them in the comments below. If you're live, we'll dive into them now. If you're asking them post being live, Tom and I will still answer 100% of the questions we have got. We've got one from Christopher here, Tom. Jonathan Taylor or Hubbard at the flex this week?
If Jonathan Taylor plays, I'm going Jonathan Taylor, and it doesn't feel particularly great because Chuba's been so good. But with Bryce Young back under center, I think you're looking at Chuba Hubbard's going to be very easy for the Broncos to take away. They've given up the 22nd most fantasy points to running back position, ranked 8th in run defense DVOA. I don't think that is a good matchup, and I think Bryce Young is going to crumble once again.
Yeah, I sadly do agree. I'd go Jonathan Taylor here. He's a full practice today, which is the first time he's been full practice since the injury. So it's trending towards him playing. I'd be confident, definitely. Before we move on, though, looking like, if you're joining us live, Puka Nacua is going to play. So exciting times. Philadelphia at Cincinnati, the next matchup. Another of the tasty games on this slate. Tom, I've been very critical of Jalen Hurts over the last few weeks. Do you think this could be a get-right game against the woeful Bengals defense?
Yeah, I mean, this is a fraud watch game. Like, which of these teams are the most fraudulent? And I sit here wearing my Ravens hoodie with Ravens jerseys behind me, fully aware of how that sounds. But the Bengals have got 3 wins over 3 teams with 4 combined wins at this point. The Eagles, they haven't looked fantastic. Jalen Hurts is rushing for career low 3.5 yards per carry. He is doing better, though, in completions per game, in yards per attempt, a lot of stuff like that. He's just slightly above his career averages. Obviously, you want to see where that plays out across the entirety of the season or not. But I think Jalen Hurts is kind of okay at the minute. I think that maybe he's just not going to be like he was when the Eagles went on that kind of like deep playoff run a couple of years ago and he looked fantastic. Maybe that's just not going to happen for him. But I think you can definitely start Jalen Hurts here because the Bengals, their defense ranks 20th against the pass, 22nd against the run. They allow 5th most quarterback fantasy points. And I think you can feel very confident about A.J. Brown. He's had over a 34% target share every single game. I'd be fine starting Devonta Smith. We've not really seen him pop for a couple of weeks, but I feel like he can do that at any point. I always want him in my lineup. I'd even start Grant Calcaterra because last week the Eagles just didn't have to pass the ball because Saquon Barkley was just doing everything. You know, he looks much better than I expected him to. And it's not just about the fact that he's in a better offense with a better offensive line. He's seen 20 targets, 16 receptions. That part was unpredictable. He's split evenly with Jalen Hurts with carries inside the 5 at 7 apiece. But in those games where he doesn't get the touchdowns, you are talking about a guy who's languishing at like RB32. So, look, I mean, I definitely have some takes about Saquon Barkley that I wish I hadn't been quite as strong on over the offseason. But I'm not going to completely give up on them. From the Bengals side, yeah, you're starting Ja'Marr Chase, you're starting T. Higgins. T. Higgins has been excellent, out-targeting Ja'Marr Chase, you know, seeing more first read targets and doing more with it at times, whereas Ja'Marr Chase needs those big broken tackle runs at the minute to be able to get really big points. But yeah, I don't have any concerns about them. Zach Moss and Chase Brown has kind of gotten interesting again. We've seen Chase Brown outsnap Zach Moss for 2 weeks now. And in terms of what Chase Brown's doing with it, I mean, look, 65% opportunity share for the last couple of weeks. He is going to be quite touchdown dependent, but he's kind of an RB3 type flex play most weeks.
Yeah, I think the thing I'm watching with Chase Brown is that receiving usage. We saw last couple of weeks he's got in for a couple of pass pro snaps. At the moment, though, Zach Moss has still got all the third down, all the 2-minute drill on lockdown. If he can start to eat into that, that's where I'm kind of starting to feel excited. But yeah, I think this is a great matchup. Plenty of options you can be starting. Devonta Smith, I really want to see him get going. I was banging the table here after week 1. Slot receiver for Kellen Moore offense. He's going to boost. He's going to go massive. But unfortunately, it feels like we're running the Jalen Hurts offense, not the Kellen Moore offense. So fingers crossed things get back to how they did. Before we move on to the next one, though, Tom, we got a few questions in the chat. So David Njoku or Tucker Craft. That's Njoku for me. I've got him as a top 3 option this week. Do you agree?
No, I'm going Tucker Craft. I just think the Jags give up too many fantasy points to the tight end position. And as much as I think Njoku can see huge volume, that's the kind of area of the field where Kyle Hamilton and Roquan Smith like to sit.
Perfect. And then Martin, Dynasty trade, he's saying trade away Cooper Cup and Bateman for Ayuk and a second. As long as you're not contending. Now, I know this trade because we've been talking it through all day, Martin, but I would go the Ayuk and second side because I know that he's in a rebuild at the moment.
Yeah, I think that makes complete sense. I mean, much as I wouldn't want to trade away two of my favorite wide receivers, Ayuk in a second for them is a great value.
The one thing I would say in Ayuk is it's ACL and MCL, so I think we just need to keep an ear to the ground. If he can get both surgeries done at the same time, that's fine. He should be back in a year. If not, it could be that he misses some of 2025 season. Javonte or DJ Moore this week. That's Javonte for me.
Yeah, I think Javonte's got an excellent matchup, which of course we'll talk to when we get to that game. DJ Moore, I think, is a fine matchup, but if Marcus Mariota starts, it probably dings it a little bit, and Jane Daniels hasn't practiced yet this week.
Perfect. And then Romeo Dubs or JSN? JSN for me.
Yeah, I'd go JSN. It's kind of a real prove it week for him.
And then we got one trade question before we move into the next matchup. Trade Mahomes plus Breece Hall or Kyron Williams for Jaden Daniels, Tony Pollard, Malik Neighbors, redraft Superflex.
Mahomes plus Breece for Jaden Daniels.
That feels like an
Neighbors.
Absolute smash for me. I'd rather Jaden Daniels over Mahomes straight up, and I'd rather Malik Neighbors over Breece or Kyron.
Yeah.
So it feels like you're getting a free Tony Pollard.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be smashing that completely. I think that's a great trade for you, Paraiko.
Yeah, perfect. Right. Moving on to the next matchup. We talked about Jonathan Taylor at the top, and it feels like he's probably the biggest question mark here. Indianapolis versus Houston. Are we going to see Jonathan Taylor backfiring and this Colts offense starting to find its way?
Well, if not, then I think that we're going to really be in Joe Flacco needs to start territory, much as I hate to say it, because Richardson is now 32nd in completion rate at 48%. Like, we are in Tim Tebow territory here. It's no joke how poor Richardson's completion rate is. And yes, there's lots of things that he's doing on the field which are different to Tebow and Tim Tebow never could have done. And there's lots of little positives that you can scrape from the film. But sooner or later, you've got to start turning the little positives into big moments. And it feels like such a long time ago since that, was it week 1, week 2 throw of like 65 yards or so, which was incredible. It was encouraging to see the Colts give Richardson a season high 9 designed runs in week 7. His previous high was 7 the week before that. Like the first couple of weeks, he was down at 3 or 4. So it wasn't very good. I don't know how you could start any of the Colts wide receivers with any confidence. I'd be fine, though, starting Jonathan Taylor, as we mentioned before, if he gets kind of positive reports. But really, for me, this one just comes back to what do the Texans look like? Because the Texans, for me, have been one of the biggest disappointments of the season. From a fantasy perspective, CJ Stroud still doesn't give us any of those ceiling outcomes that we need. He's coming off his second worst career performance. But that was against a Packers team that brought pressure at an absurd rate. The Colts, they create the second lowest pressure rate, so I'm not sure we're going to see any of that. I think that we're going to see plenty of Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon has been absolutely cooking lately. He's been over 26 PPR points in 3 of his 4 games, averaging 5.1 yards per carry. The Colts allowed Tank Bigsby and Tony Pollard to score over 17 points against them. And Mixon last week had an 87% opportunity share, really big amount. He's had 4 explosive runs, which are runs of 15 plus yards. So very much excited about him. Where are you at on Tank Dell? Because it kind of feels like last chance saloon. Like we've seen a real yo-yo in these games where Nico's been missing.
Yeah, I think people expected too much. It feels like we do this every year. He broke his leg last year. We saw Tony Pollard go until week 11 before he was saying he was fully healthy. I still believe in the talent. I still believe in him longer term. This week, I can start him as a wide receiver 3, but I don't think you can expect anything more than that at the moment. He's kind of that wide receiver flex play. He's in a similar range to me as Josh Downs and Michael Pittman. I think the only wide receiver in this game you can start with confidence is really Stephon Diggs, unfortunately.
No, I'd agree with that. I think it's just messy, and Tank Dell clearly has the talent, but it just doesn't seem to be. It doesn't seem to be shining through for whatever reason. I think your point about his broken leg is very valid.
I would say as well, he's been very close to a couple of big plays. Like it's one of those where it's a toss of the coin goes the other way. He pulls in a couple of deep shot touchdowns, and suddenly his stats are looking very different. Everyone's talking about him very differently. But let's be honest, this matchup is all about one guy and one guy only, and that's Joe Mixon, Tom, and he's your start of the week.
Yeah, and for all the reasons I mentioned before about how many points he's been scoring, but also the Colts have faced the lowest pass rate over expectation on defense because teams don't need to pass on them. They can just run on them. They've put the Colts in situations where they're the ones having to do plenty of passing. And I think that we're going to see a team who likes to run the ball a lot on first downs, who likes to run the ball because of PFF Bobby, their offensive coordinator. They lean into it, and I think that this is going to be another big week for Joe Mixon. I would be playing him everywhere I possibly could.
Yeah, I love this call, and I think it's going to be a smash, certainly. Couple of questions before we move on, though, Tom. Rocky's saying, do I roll with Puka or stick with Monty in the flex? I'm going Montgomery there.
I'm gonna go Puka because I don't like the matchup with the Titans. I think the Titans really suck the air out of fantasy football matchups lately. Their run defense ranks top 6 in DVOA, whereas you look at the Vikings, they allow the most wide receiver fantasy points to the position. It's a risk if you start Puka. Look, you've got to be comfortable knowing that he could stand on the sideline or he could be doing cardio sprints out there. But I think I'm just shooting for the upside with Puka.
Yeah, I'm just nervous. Jordan Whittington being active and then running, what was it, 7 routes last week? That's made me nervous that we could see something similar with Puka this week.
Cost me a couple of doubloons, that one.
Another question we got: standard format, start one flex, Jaden Reed, Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle, or David Montgomery.
Man, these are good problems to have because those are all nice choices. I mean, in standard, I quite often go back to touchdowns, and I think David Montgomery, even though I said that I would be starting Puka over him, probably has the best chances there, or Jaden Reed.
I think I'm going Jaden Reed. I think it's a bounce back week. I think he's going to go big. And let's be honest, you said it at the top. Start everyone against the Jacksonville Jaguars, quite frankly. If you want your questions answered, though, get them in the comments below. We'll answer 100% of your questions live, and we'll answer them all the way up to Sunday's kickoff. Arizona versus Miami. Tom, the return of Tua. Does this save all of those fantasy assets in Miami?
I think it does, and it's the perfect matchup for him because the Cardinals will have 4th most quarterback fantasy points, 12th most of running backs, 7th most of wide receivers, and the 12th most of tight ends. I don't think that the Dolphins are going to be a particularly good offense this year, but look, this Dolphins team's been averaging a league low 10 points per game since he suffered his concussion in week 2 to the Bills. Miami have just been dreadful at every single point. You know, you look at what Tyreek and Waddle have gone through over the last few weeks, and it's been just disgraceful. Mike McDaniel has to come into the season next year with a better backup plan at the quarterback position. So, yeah, I'm very much interested in starting all of them. I don't think we need to talk too much about what those players have done over the last few weeks because we kind of have to throw it all out. It just kind of comes down to what do the Cardinals do in this one? Because the Cardinals have also been incredibly poor. And the Dolphins, no quarterbacks finished higher than QB 19 against them, despite the fact they played Josh Allen, Geno Smith, Anthony Richardson. The Dolphins, they play single high coverage 55% of the time. That's a coverage which Kyler Murray really struggles against. He ranks 25th in completion rate over expected according to fantasy points. And we know, we've talked about this multiple times on this channel, that Kyler Murray is starting games incredibly hot, then he tails off really sharply. He's at 8 first half passing touchdowns, 1 second half one. Marvin Harrison Jr. hasn't scored double-digit points since week 4. The matchup is kind of fine. Jalen Ramsey's been playing well, but Miami do rank 30th in DVOA against wide receiver ones. It's just the chemistry and the usage that remain the biggest barriers. Outside of Marvin Harrison, like, look, these depth pieces, Michael Wilson, he's the only Cardinals wide receiver to score over 9 points in the last 3 weeks. There's only 3 wide receivers who've scored a touchdown in a game this year and gone on to score no more than 7.5 PPR points. The Cardinals have got 2 of them. Michael Wilson and Greg Dortch. Like, so even when they're getting in the end zone, they're not turning into fantasy relevant receivers. James Conner, though, incredibly fantasy relevant, leads the league in missed tackles forced at 40, averaging 14 PPR points per game, also averaged 4.6 yards per attempt, which is the second best rate of his career. And Miami allowed the sixth most running back fantasy points. James Conner was very close to being my start of the week.
Yeah, love James Conner every week, but particularly this week. On the Marvin Harrison point, we talked week one. He came out, there was all the hype. He had a dud. I threw out the squeaky wheel game narrative. He had that absolute blow up week in the first half in week two. It feels like everything I've listened to and read in the past 48 hours has been deep dives into Marvin Harrison and who's to blame and what's going on. Is this another squeaky wheel narrative? Are we going to see Marvin Harrison force fed the ball early and often and a potentially blow up game?
Well, if that's the kind of way they're going to go, then they need to start using him properly, because there's so much data for him. Look, friend of the channel, Dwayne McFarland, talked about it this week. Josh Norris also talked about it this week, about how they're using Marvin Harrison just isn't conducive to good fantasy football results. Like, it's all go routes. It's all these low probability ones. And we've seen this over the years. Like, give guys some in-breaking routes like Drake London, who is thriving now because he's got those in-breaking routes. Give guys those slot snaps. And I kind of feel like this is definitely a game where you can do that. Miami aren't particularly good against slot wide receivers, but I don't feel confident that the Cardinals are going to pivot to it.
Yeah, I mean, I heard someone shout out, which I think is the perfect solution. You've got Michael Wilson, who played the X for the second half of the year last year. At the moment, he's running all the easy routes over at Z. Slide him into X, give him Marvin Harrison some free releases, some easy routes, and suddenly it will make everything look so much better. But we've got Wade in the chat asking one. Puka's questionable. Does he go with Cooper Kupp or bench him for Dobbins? I mean, I've got Cooper Kupp as a top 5 wide receiver, so I'm going Cooper Kupp here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely fine starting Cooper Kupp. He sounded much less questionable than Puka Nacua. Dobbins has got a really nice matchup, which we'll get to, but I'm fine with Cooper Kupp because the Vikings allow the most fantasy points to the wide receivers. Matthew Stafford's been pretty good against the blitz this year, so I think he's going to be getting the ball out quickly to Cooper Kupp.
Yeah, absolutely. Feels like we're getting all the Puka questions. Here's one more. Would you trade Puka and Josh Jacobs for Alvin Kamara? That's an easy no for me.
No, I wouldn't do that either. You've sat through Puka being injured, and now you go into Kamara at a time where his offensive line is really banged up. His efficiency started to wane. I don't want to be doing that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The next game, the Jets at the Patriots. We can probably keep this nice and quick, Tom. Is it a case of start Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, and nobody else in this game?
Well, it's possible you might not even want to start all of them, but the Jets somehow are 7-point favorites, which kind of blew my mind when I saw that a little bit. But the Patriots, they allow the highest completions over expected in the league. The Jets allow the second lowest. So it feels like things should favor the Jets more than they should favor Drake May. Drake May's been excellent, though. Like, his catchable ball rate on passes traveling 10 plus air yards. It ranks third among 36 quarterbacks. Jacoby Brissett ranked 33rd. Like, Drake May is doing exactly what we wanted. Like, he was accurate on 8 of 12 passes beyond 10 yards against the Jags. He is somebody that I really want to start week in, week out. And when I was putting together my quarterback rankings this week, it really gave me a lot of pause. But look, I mean, yeah, Breece Hall, the usage he's had over the last couple of weeks has been absurdly good. An 83% opportunity share over the last 2 since the coaching change. So I would be starting him with confidence. We saw Devontae Adams have 9 targets last week. He only caught 3 of them, but he also saved a pick 6, didn't he? So I think he's going to be plenty involved. And I believe Aaron Rodgers' best game in terms of fantasy production came against the Patriots when these teams met in week 3, was it?
Yeah, it's disgusting that we've got rematches already at this point in the season. It feels like it's going far too fast. But yeah, no, I don't particularly love anyone in this game. I think, yeah, you've probably got to start the Jets options. Hunter Henry, to me, isn't a top 12 tight end. Demario Douglas, I'm a bit concerned as a Jets fan as to the state of our secondary. It feels like every single one of them is beaten up at the moment. So maybe you could get Demario Douglas as a kind of a deeper shot. But even then, I don't feel particularly comfortable starting him.
No, and I think that's where we're going to be with this Patriots offense in general. Ramondre Stevenson hasn't looked particularly good over the last couple of weeks. I think that there will be games where we do want to start him, but this one against the Jets defense, who rank 29th in run defense DVOA, I mean, that should be a decent matchup on paper, but I just don't really have much faith in the Patriots to get it done.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've got another question from Robert in the chat. He's saying he's got AJ Brown starting. We need to pick a second one for his flex. Chris Olave, Waddle, Ricky Pearsall, Mario Douglas, McMillan, or Dobbins. It's J.K. Dobbins for me.
Yeah, I'd be going Dobbins there, and then after that, I think let me just double check here. But
Waddle would be the second for me.
Yeah, Waddle ahead of Olave.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to get your questions answered, we do this each and every week, though. If you want to join us each and every week, hit the subscribe button. You get the little reminder when we are live, and you can come and join us, ask all the questions you want. Atlanta versus Tampa Bay next. Again, another divisional matchup, another rematch. This feels like this could be really fun. And then you remember the Bucs have got no wide receivers. Does that affect things how you're approaching this matchup?
It affects my mental state of approaching this game because Chris Godwin was absolutely balling out, like having a career year, looked like easily one of the best fantasy values that we had this past off season. And now you're talking about a guy who's going to be a potential free agent by the time that he's trying to recover from his dislocated ankle. And you really just have to wonder, what's it going to do for Baker Mayfield? We already saw that in that game against the Ravens where he played without Mike Evans for the vast majority. Baker Mayfield was starting to get skittish. He was leaving the pocket more. And part of that is possibly because of the Ravens' pass rush, which isn't particularly excellent, but did a good job that night. But the Falcons' pass rush is really poor. So maybe they can't bring enough pressure, and maybe Baker Mayfield stays calm. But if he stays calm and sits in there, then you're counting on Cade Otton to be probably one of his best options, who had a season high in catches and yards with 8 for 100 against the Ravens. We saw him have some big games in the playoffs, and at the back end, I think it was week 18 last year. He also had another big game, one of those fantasy irrelevant games. So maybe Cade Otton can be pretty decent. Of course, like if you start talking about the middle of the field and where Cade Otton's likely going to see a decent amount of targets, that's where Jesse Bates likes to patrol. So it's really difficult when it comes to the wide receivers. I think that we probably see more Trey Palmer this week, and over time we go over to Jalen McMillan. But Jalen McMillan, this is exactly what he was drafted for, wasn't it? The long-term replacement for Chris Godwin. So I'd be lying if I said I had a strong feel there. I think it's worth mentioning that the Bucs running game was excellent against the Ravens, who've been very good against the run. Rachaad White is averaging 5.4 yards per carry over his last 3. According to Nathan Yankee of PFF, that's his best 3-game stretch of his career. And honestly, I can't remember any point where he's even strung 2 games together over 5 yards per carry.
One game.
Yeah, like good for Rachaad White. I think it sounds like Bucky Irving is questionable and might miss this game. So if this backfield condenses to a 2-person backfield rather than a 3-person backfield, that is definitely helpful. The Falcons have allowed the 6th fewest running back fantasy points. So it's not like they give up a lot of them. But I don't think the Bucs have got any choice but to lean into it. On the Falcons side, though, I mean, look, you don't need to hear more Drake London propaganda from me. I think he's just going to continue to eat and continue to be an excellent option. He's on pace to be putting up similar numbers to what the wide receiver 4 did in 2023, wide receiver 3 in 2022. Bijan had his first 100-yard rushing game since week 4 last week, week 4 of his rookie year, that is. 21 carries, 103 yards, 6th in total yards with 483 rushing yards. Kyle Pitts, 65 or more receiving yards in 3 straight games, which is awesome to see. And it's coming because his average depth of target is 7.8 yards, whereas his previous career low in a season was 10.8. They're bringing him closer to the line of scrimmage, giving him some easier targets, and it seems to be clicking. So start all your Falcons, start Rachaad White, maybe start Sean Tucker. And then if you need to start one of the wide receivers, yeah, but Baker Mayfield, it's a shame because he'd entered real streamable territory every week, but I'm not sure we can start with confidence now.
No, I think he was more than streamable. I agree with Captain here. He's saying Trey Palmer taking on the Mike Evans role. when Mike Evans was injured, when he was struggling, Trey Palmer came in and played almost every single snap. So it appears that way. Obviously, now they've had a week to practice, they might move things around. But I think Trey Palmer, if you're looking for cheap options in DFS, if you're looking for a desperation flex play, I think you can go a lot worse than that this week. We do have a couple of questions, though, Tom. Patrick's saying he's got Keenan Allen, or does he go Shakir or Coleman?
Yeah, I mean, I'd definitely be starting Keenan Allen this week against the Commanders. I think that's definitely a matchup we want to lean into. If you're looking against Shakir or Coleman, it's probably Shakir. His role feels a little bit more secure, and he should be slot receiver for the Bills.
He's come in with a second. Tank Dell, Nick Chubb, Shakir, Tracy, all flex options. I think that's Tank Dell for me.
Yeah, I'm going Tank Dell there.
Perfect. If you want your questions answered like Patrick, get them in the comments below. We'll get to them at the end of each matchup. Tom, your Baltimore Ravens head to Cleveland. Jameis Winston week. Does this make you a little bit more nervous than if they had Sean Watson on center?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, when I looked at the calendar a couple of weeks ago and I was trying to work out when we'd see Deshaun Watson benched, this was the game I was circling. I was like, please let the Ravens end his season 2 years in a row. Well, the season's over and good riddance. Like, no bones about that one. But Jameis Winston, it's been 5 years since he was a starter. In the last 2 years, he's only had 3 games with 10 plus pass attempts, and he's gone through those with 45% completion rate, 52%, 62%. He's thrown 3 touchdowns in those 3 games to 2 interceptions. I don't think that Jameis Winston is the same quarterback that we used to see when he was in Tampa, when he was going 30 for 30. I think what we get from Jameis Winston these days when he comes in is a much more dialed down version of him. You know he's going to do something stupid at some point, but I don't think it's quite as volatile as it could have been. I just don't think he's as good as a lot of people do. I think, though, you can definitely start Cedric Tillman. He had a 25% target share last week. He had 18 fantasy points. David Njoku had 23.6 fantasy points, 80% of the routes, 29% target share. Of course, everything's opened up now. Amari Cooper's gone. But I'm not sure that it's going to be a particularly great day. I think the Ravens are favored by 9 in this one, so I'm not sure that Nick Chubb has much value outside of touchdowns. Obviously, he had 10 rush attempts last week, but only got 22 yards with him. This offensive line is still not good, and the Ravens have been very good at stuffing the run. On the Ravens side, it's so good to see Rashad Bateman finally kind of putting it all together. He's been responsible for Lamar's 3 longest completions this year, and he's been a top 36 wide receiver for the last 3 weeks. Lamar Jackson has been excellent against both the blitz this year. I think he ranks second in success rate against it. Washington, when they played a heavy amount of man coverage. It didn't work. Last week, we saw the Bucs play loads of zone coverage. It didn't work. We're just seeing a truly special offensive minute, and I'd be content starting Mark Andrews now after 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games. I think that he seems to be finding his role again, and particularly in the red zone. Zay Flowers, the big question mark, though. As of Thursday, he hasn't practiced at all. It does sound like he could be out there still, though, so we'll see. But how are you feeling about this game?
Yeah, I'm super excited about this. You know that I'm a big fan of Jameis, not necessarily the football player, but just for fun. We know that he's going to chuck it around. We know that he's going to have a great time. And look, last week, Amari Cooper moved on. We were saying who's going to step up, who's going to move into that shadow. A lot of people expected Jerry Jeudy, but Cedric Tillman, I was a big fan of him as a rookie. He had one of the worst rookie seasons you could ever imagine last year. But last week, Tom, let me throw some stats at you. First read percentage, Cedric Tillman 31%, Jerry Jeudy 12. Yards per route run, Tillman 1.8, Jerry Jeudy 0.35. Targets per route run, Tillman 27%, Jerry Jeudy 8%. Expected fantasy points per route run, Cedric Tillman 0.54, Jerry Jeudy 0.2. Look, I am so excited about Cedric Tillman this week. It is ridiculous. I'm starting him in my home league. I think as a wide receiver 3 flex option, if you like having fun, let's go for it. He's my start of the week. Get a little bit deep this week, maybe going a little bit too far, but yeah, I'm really excited about him. Are you starting him with confidence?
I mean, I'm definitely fine playing Cedric Tillman. I've got a high stakes league where the waiver wire is barren, and I missed out on a bunch of guys I wanted this week, but the one I did get was Cedric Tillman. So I have a choice between Rashad Bateman or Cedric Tillman in that league, and I'm probably going to go back and forth on it a few times in the lead up to kickoff.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got some questions here. Captain's asking Kyler or Caleb this week.
Let me just check my rankings on this one. Like Kyler's like last chance saloon as a QB1 for me. I'm really struggling to keep him up there. Yeah, I've got Caleb at QB6 this week. I think what we saw from him before the bye starting to really put it together. The matchup looks great.
Yeah, I'd lean Kyler, but it's very close. And then the second one's Terry McLaurin, Xavier Worthy, Rico Dowdle. That's Terry McLaurin for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, perfect. And then another question from Alex with Kyler, Nix, Goff, with Hunt, Bucky, CMC rostered. Would you trade Kyler or Goff for Pacheco?
Yeah,
Assuming this is super flex.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be fine trading either of them. Really, I think if either of them was going to really hit ceiling outcomes, it's possibly if Kyler can turn it around. But Goff feels fine. I'd be okay with either of them.
Yeah, I'd be okay with that. Yeah, don't necessarily love it, but I'd be okay with it. And then Jace Mills is asking thoughts on team, what to work on. He's got Jordan Love, Malik Neighbors, DK Metcalf, Olave, Puka, Brian Thomas Jr., Jonte Johnson, Trey McBride, Pitts, Hall. I think this is just flexing. He's got Cole Pitts, Brees Hall, Devon Achan, Tony Pollard, and Jonathan Brooks.
Get the hell out of here with this brag.
Yeah.
I mean, you could possibly do with a bit more running back depth. Maybe you could look to package, I don't know, like Pollard and one of your wide receivers to get up to another higher quality running back. But that's about all I'd be looking at.
Yeah, maybe go and knock on CMC or Bijan Robinson's owner's door, see if you can get something like that.
Yeah, or if that is a smaller league where you're talking 8 or 10 teams and everybody's a bit more stacked, then I'd possibly be looking to upgrade from Jordan Love.
Yeah, I agree with that. So Bray is saying he can trade DK, Swift, and Puka for JJ plus either James Cook or Kenneth Walker.
Yes.
Yeah, if you can get Kenneth Walker in that, I'd much prefer it over James Cook.
Yeah, but Puka, JJ, absolutely.
Yeah. And then Rory feels like he's asking me this every day at the moment. Lamar's not moving ahead of Josh Allen in my Dynasty QB ranks yet. We will see, but not yet. Moving on to the next game, though, Tom. Tennessee versus Detroit. I feel like we can blitz through this in 10 seconds. Start all Detroit Lions, sit all Tennessee Titans outside of Tony Pollard.
Yeah, I mean, the only point where we kind of have to talk just briefly about it is Jameson Williams now suspended for the next 2 games. What does that do? Does it give Sam Laporta an opportunity to see a greater target share because he's been below 10% in 4 of 6 games so far? He was above that in 16 of 17 games in his rookie year. And Sam Laporta really hasn't delivered. I think, when you're talking about a tight end who's disappointed this year, he's below Mark Andrews. Like, he's delivered to a very minimal level. Is it going to be more Sam Laporta, or is it going to be someone like Tim Patrick, who's averaging 48 yards per game over the last 3, or even Khalif Raymond, who's looked good over the last few? So very much interested to see how it plays out. But of course, you're starting Laporta, Ramon-Ra. I'd be trying not to start Jared Goff unless I had to, because the Titans defense is sneaky good. They rank 6th in run defense DVOA. They've allowed the 5th fewest wide receiver fantasy points, for 2nd fewest tight end fantasy points. And I think they just have a real habit of sucking the air out of the games that they play in. So much as you can start everyone here, I'm not particularly interested in doing so. On the Titans side, just a quick note, obviously, with DeAndre Hopkins out of town, what does that do for their offense? I think we know that Calvin Ridley's going to continue to see a lot of targets. Whether he does anything with them is another matter. But who steps up next? Is it going to be Tyler Boyd, who they signed this offseason, who really hasn't done anything? He's yet to hit double-digit points or score a touchdown. Only 1 game above 3 catches. Nick Westbrook-Akine has hung around on the Titans for a long time and seems to pop up in these moments. But yeah, it's just not a great fantasy matchup.
Now, do you feel like you can start Calvin Ridley this week with no DeAndre Hopkins? How high have you got him ranked this week?
Let me double check that. I've kind of been waiting, seeing on a lot of my wide receiver rankings this week to see what was going to shake out tonight. But in terms of the matchup is excellent because you've got a Detroit defense where you want to get at them. I've got Ridley as my wide receiver 40, which maybe I could come up a little bit on it. The Lions do allow the third most wide receiver fantasy points. They are a pass funnel, but with Mason Rudolph, it's tricky.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bryce is asking, do I start Russ or Cousins? That's an easy Kirk Cousins for me.
Yeah, that's very much Kirk Cousins. Just the matchup should just definitely be more fantasy viable.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to get your questions answered like Bryce, get them in the comments below. We will answer all of them whilst we are live. Buffalo versus Seattle, Tom. This is two of the faster paced teams in the league. Geno Smith doing incredible things, but being put in some incredibly difficult situations. Do we finally see this offense fully kind of kick into gear and start producing? Or do you think the lack of potentially DK Metcalf this week could put the brakes on it?
I think it will, because what DK Metcalf's been doing has been so impressive. We've talked about it week in, week out. He's running shallower routes. He's running across the field more often than he's been. He's getting more yak than he normally has. So I think it's hard to avoid that hurting them. But this should still be a fun matchup because both teams play fast. And when you get two teams who play fast, that results in more plays, that results in more fantasy points. So, like Geno this week, I mean, when we look at Geno, he's been a top 10 quarterback in all but 2 games. JSN has been a top 36 wide receiver in 4 of 7, only 1 game inside the top 29, but he has had a 20% target share over the last 4 games. He feels like the guy who has to benefit from this. I'm sure we'll see a decent amount of Tyler Lockett. Obviously, you want to start Kenneth Walker because he's just looked electric over the last few games. Buffalo allow the second most running back fantasy points, the 8th fewest wide receiver fantasy points. So perhaps we see Seattle really lean into running the damn ball like Mike McDonald said he wanted to do a couple of weeks ago. But it's always tricky with the Bills because they can put up points and take you away from that. Like Josh Allen is 3rd in the league in EPA per dropback, 4th in passer rating, 4th in passing touchdowns, and still has no interceptions on the season. But he needs someone to stand up. I mean, is it going to be Amari Cooper? He didn't play an awful lot last week. He only played 33% of the snaps on his debut. Dalton Kincaid just isn't getting it done. Like we talked about in the offseason, that he would need a really pure run out in order to pay off his cost. And what we've seen, it's not really happening. You know, he's only got 1 reception in the red zone. He's only had 1 more target than Dawson Knox has had in the red zone. He's only had 2 games all year over 4 catches. And Davis Mattek pointed this out on Twitter, but Dalton Kincaid now has less career touchdowns than Mark Andrews has scored in the last 2 weeks, which I think takes me to my quota of Mark Andrews mentions today. But yeah, I feel pretty good about most of the players that you'd want to start in this one. I think I'm probably not playing Keon Coleman this week because I want to see how this develops with Amari Cooper out there. Dalton Kincaid, well, I don't roster Dalton Kincaid anywhere, so this isn't a problem for me, but I think if you've got somebody with a better matchup, then maybe you might want to do it. But the Seahawks do allow the 8th most fantasy points to the tight end position.
Yeah, I think Kincaid, he's a fringe starter this week, isn't he? Depends how you attack your kind of draft, but realistically, he's probably the only tight end in your roster. He's outside the top 12 for me, but I appreciate some people probably don't want to get away from him. I agree with you on Keon Coleman. I think one player we've disagreed with most this season, Tom, Amari Cooper. I'm all in this week. He's top 15 wide receiver for me. I'm really excited about, I think, how he looked, the way Josh Allen trusted him immediately and forced the ball to him. Yes, he only played 33% of snaps last week. I expect that to be a full quota this week. Are you starting him fringe wide receiver 1, or as you have been all year, are you a little bit cooler on him?
Well, I mean, the main reason I was cool on him, let's remember, was Deshaun Watson. So, like, you know, targets from Josh Allen count exponentially more than they did from Deshaun Watson. So, yeah, I think you can definitely start him with confidence. I think I've got him as wide receiver 18 this week, and maybe I'll nudge him up 1 or 2 spots before we get to kickoff. But it's not necessarily a perfect matchup for him. The Seahawks have been pretty good against outside wide receivers where Amari Cooper does a lot of his damage. But yeah, I have no worries about him going forward. I think Amari Cooper is going to be very good for the rest of the fantasy season.
Beautiful. We got some questions. So Bray's saying Mooney or Puka. I'm going Mooney. I'm not risking Puka there.
Yeah, I think that's about the line where I'd be going. I think Mooney is my wide receiver 26 this week, and I'm going to be hard pushed to bring Puka ahead of that, considering how late in the day it was where we eventually found out that he was going to play.
Yeah, absolutely. Sit one. Jordan Mason, Devon Achan. I presume that's Garrett Wilson and Brian Thomas Jr.
It's going to be Garrett Wilson for me.
Yeah, I think it's a toss-up for me between Mason and Wilson, but I'd lean Wilson sitting. Who do I start? Flex, Javonte, Brian Thomas, Amari Cooper, or Cook?
It's Javonte Williams for me. Really like that matchup.
Yeah, it's very close between Javonte and Amari Cooper, but I would lean Javonte. Although I like that you're having to sit three of those. That feels your roster must be absolutely loaded. Jordan is asking, he's been wrecked with injuries. Would you play Puka tonight? Other options would be Jaden Reed and Rashad Bateman. Jaden Reed easily for me.
I think, yeah, I'm going Jaden Reed there. I'm probably not playing Bateman over Nacua, but it's close in that kind of range. And also shout out to John, good friend of mine.
Perfect. And then TS is saying Tua or Darnold this week.
That's going to be Darnold for me. The matchup feels really good. The Rams defense atrocious.
Yeah, Darnold for me as well. Kansas City versus the Raiders. Who'd have thought a Patrick Mahomes-led team would be in a 41.5 over-under, Tom? How are you attacking this one after the big trade in the week?
Well, I mean, first we've got to say, I mean, the Chiefs could put up 30 points and the Raiders could only put up 10. That's very possible with this current iteration. It'll be interesting to see how much DeAndre Hopkins plays. Obviously, it sounds like this one was in the works for about 7 to 10 days. There was some stuff that DeAndre Hopkins put out last week, which kind of seemed to hint that he was expecting a trade might happen. And it just... We saw how Patrick Mahomes latched on to Juju Smith-Schuster the moment he was there and made him fantasy relevant very quickly. Now, of course, Juju knew this scheme, and the Chiefs scheme's quite different to the kind of scheme which the Titans have been running. But DeAndre Hopkins is the kind of possession wide receiver that the Chiefs badly need. So I'd be starting DeAndre Hopkins if I need to. I think it's fair to plug him in as a top 36 wide receiver this week. I think you immediately look at this and go, what happens to Xavier Worthy? Because weeks 1 to 6, he was running go routes at a rate of 34%. In week 7, that dropped down to 12% because they try to use him in different ways to get him more involved. And what do we see? They go and make a trade for a different wide receiver. So I think Worthy goes back to those kind of routes, and we just have to wait for the development there. It's no bad thing. It's just a little frustrating because we know the talent he has. In terms of the rest of these guys, it was really disappointing to see Noah Gray, the only pass catcher over 19 yards in the win over the Niners. Like, what are we doing here? Everybody's heard the stat already. Mahomes averaging 1 touchdown per game and 1.3 interceptions. But the Raiders, they allow the 8th most running back fantasy points. So this is another Kareem Hunt game. The way this running back room is shaping up, CH, if he starts to get out there was a report last week that he was never going to play last week, but this week was the week they were earmarking for him. So what does that look like? And then on the other side, Brock Bowers, I'm a little bit concerned. We remember how a certain Ravens tight end, whose name I won't mention again today, but he got double teamed in week 1 and completely taken out of the game by the Chiefs. The Chiefs have done that on a couple of occasions, just locked in on the number 1 target and removed them. Can Brock Bowers overcome that? Of course, you're going to start him anyway, but I think you just kind of like have to temper expectations slightly with him. Zamir White, 12.5% opportunity share last week, only 3 for 13 on the ground. Whereas Alexander Mattison's had 2 games in a row of 15 points. If you're in a desperation state and need to start a flex play, Alexander Mattison's kind of okay. Otherwise, I don't want a part of any of this Raiders offense.
Yeah, absolutely. On the Brock Bowers point, I'm a little bit more confident just because of how the Raiders are using him. You know, they are scheming him up. They're moving him in motion. He's getting free releases. I think they can absolutely double him. They can absolutely stick a safety over the top, but they're using him in unique enough ways that I'm not terrified. And let's be honest, you're not sitting him in any lineups, are you?
No,
Uh,
no.
On the tight end point, though, Tucker Craft, Carl Pitts this week. That's Tucker Craft for me.
Let me just double check this one because I know I've got them very close. I have Tucker Craft at tight end 6 and Kyle Pitts at tight end 7.
Oh, there you go. Super close. And then Elijah's asking Henry and Njoku or Ferguson rest of season.
I think it's Ferguson. Henry's probably for what I assume that this is Hunter Henry, but yeah, Hunter Henry's probably
ends,
the one. Yeah, Henry's the one I'd be leaning towards dropping. Ferguson's been pretty decent. I think the Cowboys offense can kick on after the bye week, but yeah, I wouldn't drop Ferguson or Njoku.
Yeah, I think for me, it's Ferguson and Njoku are basically a toss-up rest of the season, but they're both a tier ahead of Hunter Henry. And then final question before we move on to the next matchup, Sam or Gino? I presume that's Sam Darnold. It's Darnold for me.
Yeah, just again, the matchup is so good. I've got Sam Darnold as my QB7 this week. Gino is like a fringe QB1.
Perfect. Well, continuing the trend of disgusting low-scoring matchups, we've got the Bryce Young-led Carolina Panthers versus the Bo Nix-led Denver Broncos. Is this the worst QB matchup we're going to see this year?
I hope so. I mean, I don't believe it will be because, well, we've had 68 and 69 quarterbacks start the last 2 seasons, so we've still probably got some room for it. Look, the Panthers should be feeling pretty good about the fact that they've been gifted an opportunity to try and get Bryce Young out there and get some trade value for him. Because if he can go out and play okay against this Broncos defense, then he'll be on the move by Wednesday next week. But it's most likely not going to happen because Denver have been excellent. They rank 4th first pass defense DVOA, 8th versus the run. They bring a lot of pressure. They're very good in coverage. And you look at what they do, they run a huge amount of man coverage. That doesn't feel like something that Bryce Young has been very good at beating. The Panthers, they've given up 71 points in their last 7 quarters of football and a last in league scoring margin at minus 133. That's on the pace to be the worst margin per game in at least the last 20 years, according to True Media. I mean, there's just no point talking about the Panthers pass catchers. We've seen so little that if you need to start one of them, then you need to start one of them. I mean, Jatavian Sanders was just getting interesting with a 20% target share over the last 3 games, at least 5 targets in each game. It's just not going to happen with Bryce Young. Johnny Johnson has been usable at times. It's not going to happen with Bryce Young. On the other side of this game, though, you've got Javonte Williams, who's coming off a season-high 26 PPR points, first game over 16 all year. He beat up on a poor Saints run defense, who are really poor. They're a massive run funnel. Carolina are worse. Carolina allow the most running back fantasy points. They rank 31st in pass defense DVOA, but 32nd in run defense DVOA. They've got no talent. This team tried to fast track things by bringing in the quarterback because of David Tepper's obsession with the position, and they're talent poor. Like name more than one Carolina defender who isn't J.C. Horn or Jadeveon Clowney.
Yeah, no, it's a terrible defense. It's a terrible franchise. I think the less we can talk about them, the better. I don't really care for this matchup. The thing I'm interested in is these young options that are starting to earn more playing time. You mentioned Jatavian Sanders. I talked about him in the buy sells video that released earlier this week. I've been really encouraged by what I've seen over the last 3 weeks. I loved him as a rookie in terms of prospect. I think, yeah, it could be discussed in this week, Bryce Young under center, but maybe that gives you one more week of a buy window to go out and get him. And on the Denver side, we've seen Troy Franklin. He's now borderline in every snap player. If he can start to keep growing, and then we've also got Devon Bell as well. So if those 2 guys keep producing, maybe we're going to see them start to earn more work as we head towards the back end of the season. I think it's encouraging for those 3 young rookies. We got a question from Danzel in the chat. He's saying London, Wilson, Cooper, Mason, Alvin, JK, and Chubb need to start 2 wide receivers, 2 running backs, and a flex.
So Drake London's in there. It'd be Drake London, Amari Cooper, and then at running back, I'd be going Mason, And my lean would be JK, but I'd understand going with Alvin Kamara.
I agree with everything you've said there, and I think the flex is Alvin Kamara over Garrett Wilson for me. So it'd be sit Chubb, sit Wilson. Broncos defense or Bengals defense this week? Which one are you going?
Broncos defense by a country mile against the Panthers. Like, they could score more points than Bo Nix does.
Yeah, absolutely. Another disgusting matchup, Tom. It feels like it's the week for it. New Orleans Saints versus the Chargers. Is there anything exciting about this game right now?
Not particularly. Spencer Rattler, there was a bit of hope that he'd come in and be fun, and he was kind of fine because we've been dealing with Derek Carr, and some of these backup quarterbacks are atrocious. Spencer Rattler, he's got a bit of moxie about him at least, but he averaged 5.5 yards per attempt, which ranked 39th out of 45 QBs. Alvin Kamara's efficiency's really dropped over the last 3 games with the offensive line completely banged up. Eric McCoy, their center, has been out for a few games on IR, and Kamara's dropped to 2.3 yards per carry. He's surviving off touchdowns and receptions, which he can get by on. But the Chargers defense has been excellent. They've given up the second fewest fantasy points to the running back position. They rank 12th in run defense DVOA. They haven't allowed an awful lot of high scoring games. So I'm not sure if this one's going to really provide. Obviously, Chris Olave coming back could help. Taysom Hill should be back as well, which should help. If you need to start those guys, I would understand it. But like I say, this game, I feel pretty confident can go for the under. On the Chargers side, since their bye week, they've been passing the ball at a much higher rate. They've had their highest pass rate over expected, positive pass rate over expected in the last 2 games since the bye week. Justin Herbert kind of looked better last week than he has done at any point, but he just doesn't have the weapons. Ladd McConkey's completely banged up all the time. Josh Palmer's Josh Palmer, and Quentin Johnston's banged up. DJ Chark maybe comes off IR. Like, what are we doing here? Like, go and make a trade, make Justin Herbert relevant again, and they can figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the answer is in Dynasty, go and buy Justin Herbert because he's disgusting now. Nobody wants to start him, but actually, I think if they drop in a wide receiver 1, I think Ladd McConkey's going to be really good too. So I think Justin Herbert could be phenomenal for fantasy yet again. Before we move on though, Tom, we got a couple of questions in the chat. Drop Juju or Tillman for Jerry Jeudy. Am I mad saying that I would rather keep Cedric Tillman over Jerry Jeudy rest of the season right now?
Yeah, I think Juju and Tillman, I'd possibly just sit and be okay with that. But Juju always looked to run pure in a way that wasn't sustainable.
Yeah, agreed. And then we've got full PPR. Who do I flex? Ramonde. I'm assuming that's
Rashad White or Deontay Johnson, Mark Andrews, or Kraft. That's a tricky one.
Rashad White for me.
Yeah, I'd be going Rashad White and then Tucker Kraft in that order.
Yeah, makes sense. We're going to move across to the Chicago Bears versus the Washington Commanders. This was geared up as the battle of the top two picks in the draft. Sadly, Jaden Daniels took a shot, rib injury. He's out. Does that really make you question starting any of these Commanders players?
Yeah, it does. I mean, look, like last week's game was it was fun. Marcus Mariota played better than anyone would expect. He went 23 attempts, 18 completions, 205 yards, and 2 touchdowns. No interceptions, added 34 rushing yards on the ground. And we know that Marcus Mariota can come in and flash. But my biggest worry is that Marcus Mariota, after a week to think about it, completely capitulates. And he's going against the Chicago defense that have allowed the second fewest fantasy points, the 5th fewest wide receiver fantasy points. The Chicago defense has been excellent, dating back to about halfway through last year. They rank 2nd in pass defense DVOA. They are the biggest run funnel in the NFL right now because their run defense rating is 24th in DVOA. It is so much easier to run on them, which to me says this needs to be a Brian Robinson week. Brian Robinson should go nuclear here. Austin Eckler has played better than I expected him to this year. They don't seem to want to lean on him in the running game as much as Brian Robinson. But those 2 guys I would be starting, completely fine with that. Terry McLaurin I'd be starting even if Jaden Daniels out. Outside of that, I don't want to. On the other side of the ball, look, Caleb Williams is coming off QB1 and QB6 in his last 2 games. He seems to be slowly finding his feet in the NFL like you would expect any rookie to do. Keenan Allen's coming off a season high, 41 yards in London with 2 touchdowns. And even DeAndre Swift continues to get away with it because the Washington team, in terms of their run defense, they're slightly better than they've been in the past, but they still rank 20th in DVOA against it. So the biggest question on Washington just comes down to, does Rome Odunze start to see that post-rookie bye week bump? But I probably wouldn't want to start him this week.
Yeah, it feels like they're settling into an 11 personnel offense. DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, Cole Kmet, and DeAndre Swift. They've also seems to have realised DeAndre Swift can't run the ball, and they're just going to force feed him screen targets because it's the only thing he can do. If they're just going to do that, then I think he's going to be great for fantasy. But yeah, it'll be certainly be interesting to watch over the next one. Parker's in the chat. He's got an interesting trade question for us, Tom. He's saying, should I accept he gets, and I've checked, that's Derrick Henry and Debo for Tyreek Hill and Jonathan Taylor?
I mean, this is all my favorite things. Derrick Henry. The Derrick Henry thing is going to be completely sustainable unless he breaks down. But Jonathan Taylor has been injured all season anyway. So on that level, I think I'd go Henry because the offense is better. And then Debo versus Tyreek. I think you're kind of talking similar range. I mean, we're going to get to the Niners shortly, but Debo in games without Brandon Ayuk since 2021 averages a 38% target share.
Yeah, well, Jonathan Taylor, it's been like 3 years since he was a usable above average fantasy asset. So I'm not sure we can get too excited about that. But so, yeah, Parker, I would absolutely accept that. You hinted at the 49ers. They are on Sunday Night Football against the Cowboys. Tom, the 49ers may be having the season from hell. It feels like everybody is injured. Can you trust anyone to start this week?
Yeah, I'm going to be very eagerly waiting for those kind of Rap Sheet and Schefter tweets on Sunday morning indicating what's going to be going on with Deebo Samuel, because Kyle Shanahan said yesterday that Deebo was in the locker room. He was playing basketball in the locker room and he looked okay, which, coming off pneumonia-like symptoms, feels a little bit bullshit, but we'll see. But if Deebo plays, I'll be playing Deebo. For the reasons I just mentioned, 38% target share in games without Ayuk since 2021, 41% air yard share, 4.88 yards per route run. Those are absurd numbers. I think you have to have complete confidence that George Kittle is going to possibly have his best season in terms of fantasy production in years. Like, George Kittle has been consistent already this year, and now you take Brandon Ayuk out of it, and I'm really excited about George Kittle. Only Brock Bowers has more top 5 finishes than Kittle's 4. But the Cowboys have been piss poor against the running back position all season. They've allowed what I think it's the third most running back fantasy points. They've just been miserable against it. So perhaps Jordan Mason can get back to his ways where he was getting in the end zone. The last couple of games have been a little bit disappointing for him, but I've got a lot of confidence in him this week. And on the Cowboys side, look, last year, they went into their bye week in week 8, I think it was, or week 7, and they came out, and that's when Dak went nuclear and averaged 0.1 PPR points per game less than Josh Allen the rest of the way. CeeDee Lamb went nuclear and was averaging several PPR points more than any other wide receiver the rest of the way. The Cowboys, they need to wake up quickly. They probably don't have as much talent this year, but if they're gonna, then you can get at the Niners through the passing game. We saw the Chiefs, they kind of diced them up a little bit. It wasn't particularly explosive, but they did it. The Niners, they rank 28th in DVOA against wide receiver 2. So if you want to tell yourself a story, this is a good Jalen Tolbert week. All right, fine. Ricky Pearsall is probably the name that people are most interested in, though. Rich, do you think he's going to go out there and see a huge amount of work straight away? It was quite encouraging that as a rookie in his first game, he did see a decent snap share last week.
I think it's incredibly encouraging, but I don't think I can start him this week. I need to see it more. I think I've got him wide receiver 45 this week. Like, yeah, he's a flex play, wide receiver 4 option, but I don't think you can be confident in him just because we don't know what snap share he's going to do. We don't know how many routes he's going to run. And when there's that question, I tend to lean and look elsewhere. We do have another question from Mad Backs, though. Would you send Brian Thomas Jr., Waddle, and Nick Chubb for Tyreek and Cooper Kupp?
I always struggle with these ones. So let's see. Brian Thomas Jr., Waddle, and Chubb for Tyreek and Cup. No, I don't think I would because Brian Thomas Jr. is ascending. We've seen more from Brian Thomas Jr. than Tyreek or Cup this year. Waddle, I feel confident that he's going to crack on and do well for the rest of the season now that Tua's coming back. And then Chubb's just fine.
Yeah, I feel like I break this down. I try and do it piece by piece. Brian Thomas Jr. for Tyreek. I feel like that's a kind of a match at this point, which is ridiculous to say. Waddle Cup. I feel like that's a match. So I feel like you're giving up Chubb for nothing. So yeah, I don't think I would do that even myself.
Yeah,
Well,
and of
Tom,
course you've got the unknown of what happens with Cooper Cup. It sounds like he's probably going to be out of LA by middle of next week. So does he definitely land in a better situation, or is he dealing with Russell Wilson this time next week?
yeah, absolutely. Well, Tom, we've flirted with double headers on Monday Night Football. This week we've got a single game. So you know that the NFL have done us a great service and set up a beautiful Monday Night Football game. It is, of course, the New York Giants versus the Pittsburgh Steelers with a whopping 36.5 over under. Hopefully, Tom, this means that there's not going to be many people sweating Monday night to decide the fantasy matchups.
Yeah, I don't have too many players who I'm willing to start in this one. The one player I wanted to start is Jalen Warren, who seems to be trending towards getting back to his back half of last year workload. But Najee Harris has looked much quicker, and he looks like he's capable of breaking away from players in a way which we haven't seen over the last few years. So even that's difficult. George Pickens is coming off his best game of the season, had season highs in yards and fantasy points, scored his first touchdown of the season, I seem to remember. The Giants aren't afraid to double cover, though. They will put shadow coverage on guys. They will put two players on a single guy. And if you do that with the Steelers, you've taken away their main option because you've got Pat Fryermuth. Well, Russell Wilson doesn't use the middle of the field particularly well, so that's always going to be a bit of a lottery. So I don't feel particularly great about them. I think Russell Wilson's startable in Superflex. On the Giants side, Malik Neighbors, talking to guys who got double covered. He got double covered all game last week, which is what led to season low in production for him. I think Tyron Tracy is kind of a fine start with 72% of snaps last week. It's almost like we've seen the flippening and that now he is the RB1 ahead of Devin Singletary, who did play in that game. But the Steelers defense, I mean, it's legit. They are the third best run defense in DVOA. They've allowed the seventh fewest fantasy points to the running back position. I don't know what I'm supposed to be excited about in this game apart from Malik Neighbors.
No, I've got two additional points. I'd say I agree with you. Tyron Tracy appeared to have taken the majority of the work last week, but I would caveat and say Devin Singletary, it was his first week back. I think this week's going to be time to tell if he's fully healthy. Is he going to be 50-50, or are we going to see Tyron Tracy truly take over this backfield? And I also think sorry, go on.
No, carry on. I've just got one more point, mate, when you're done.
Yeah, and I think on George Pickens, look, I've been asked about George Pickens more this week in terms of dynasty value, in terms of redraft trades or whatever, than any other player on the entire slate. My opinion on George Pickens hasn't changed. He got very lucky on 3 50-50 balls. He could quite easily have not caught any of those. And we're talking about him the same as he's been talked about for the last 6 weeks. It was 3 moonshots from Russell Wilson that got pulled in. Okay, that could equally happen. So I'm not ready to anoint George Pickens as anything more than a kind of boom bust wide receiver 3 option.
Yeah, so my last point I was just going to make is that Pittsburgh play the third most single high coverage. Daniel Jones has taken the third most deep shots versus single high coverage. So if we're going to get another good Malik Neighbors game, then this is the way it needs to happen through those deep shots.
Yeah, absolutely. If you are here, though, 46% of you watching are subscribed. 54% of you haven't hit that subscribe button. Come join the family. Come join the party. Hit subscribe and more content will be flowing into your ears. Tom, Thursday Night Football. This is one that I'm excited to get up early and watch tomorrow morning. The Vikings versus the Rams. Could this be all set up to see Sam Darnold and Matt Stafford playing on the opposite teams next week?
Yeah, but I think that one got debunked enough, but it was definitely fun whilst it lasted. But I think, yeah, this could be the last time that we see Cooper Cup in blue and yellow. I think that this could be the last time that we see a lot of things for the Rams, because it definitely sounds like they are at least open to moving Matthew Stafford on. We know there's been a little bit of animosity over the last couple of years during training camps. Stafford wanting more security on his contract, and the Rams being a little bit hesitant to give him it. And it makes sense. Look, this team, after the Super Bowl run, they had the worst defense of the Super Bowl that we've pretty much ever seen from a team. But they've got so much left to do. They said fuck them picks for so long that their depth depleted. They've made some really great draft picks and hit on some really good players. But much like the Cowboys, you kind of see this, and even much like teams like the Jets, where they try to fast track it at times, or some of these other teams, it's like you don't need to go so quickly, but you've got to build the team over time. And I think that that's really what's been the Rams' undoing and why they kind of need to tear it down. But for this game, everything stacks up for it to be a very fantasy football relevant game. The Vikings are incredibly poor against the pass. They've allowed the most wide receiver fantasy points. They've allowed the 12th most fantasy points to the quarterback position. In terms of what they defend well, they my numbers look a little funky there, so I ain't going to get into that one. But in terms of how they play, though, they play the most cover 4 in the league. Matthew Stafford averages 9.5 yards per attempt against cover 4, which leads all quarterbacks. So if this was going to be a game for Matthew Stafford to come out and start dealing, this is the one to do it. You can start Kyren Williams with complete confidence. Blake Corum had a 12.5% opportunity share last week after the broadcast said that they wanted to get Blake Corum more involved, give him drives of his own. It just didn't happen because, you were seeing Kyren Williams be trusted more in pass protection, which they don't trust Blake Corum on. And oh, look, now you've got Brian Flores, blitz-happy defense coming to town. And it's going to be Kyren Williams out there again because they're going to need him in for that sort of stuff. On the Vikings side, obviously, you're starting Justin Jefferson. Aaron Jones looked incredibly good last week. Really, maybe a few words. I didn't think he was going to be healthy that soon. Jordan Addison is kind of fine for touchdowns. If you're not going to start him in a game like this against a defense that allows the 9th most wide receiver fantasy points in the Rams, then when are you going to start him?
Yeah, and I guess the question we've been asked most more than anything this evening, Puka Nacua, how confident you feel about him? For me, he's in that kind of wide receiver 4 territory. I don't think I could get him in my top 36.
Yeah. I just look, if you're in must-win territory, or if you're in a league which rewards kind of fantasy points. So I'm in a $350 Fantasy Pros league where we are sitting 5th at the minute, and in terms of total points scored, and if we can get to 3rd in total points scored, we'll probably secure the seed that we need to get to the playoffs. In those kind of situations where you need to take a swing, I'll start Puka Nacua, but I don't feel good about it, and I don't think that we're going to see a huge amount of work for him. I think this is going to be much more of a Cooper Kupp game.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Rams are targeting running backs at the league low rate at the moment. We know that the Vikings are going to blitz, and I think that, look, they're going to get the ball out of their hands quick. That goes to Cooper Kupp, I'm afraid. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a big Cooper Kupp game. But that is it. The week preview is finished. Remember, get all of your questions in. Tom and I will be answering them all the way up to kickoff on Sunday. Tyler will be back for a live show answering all your start set questions on Sunday. Stick around. We've got plenty more content coming your way. If you want to hit join, come join the Sanctuary. We've got all sorts of content every single day of the week, dropping in excellent value for money.